Welcome back, my dear followers. This is a new episode of The History of the American Mafia, a podcast written by Fabio Fabiano, translated and read by Grace Cardlisi. I hope you do enjoy. The Apalachin Summit. After the summit held in 1956 at the Hotel delle Palme in Palermo, in 1957, another important meeting was held. This is what will be remembered as the summit in Apalachin, New York. It was a milestone in the history of crime in America. Apalachin, an urban area of the United States of America, located in the state of New York, in Tioga County. The territory of the county is predominantly hilly. The highest point is 609 meters above sea level. The house where the meeting would take place was already under observation by the New York State Police, led by Edgar Croswell. Croswell had already placed the owner of the villa where the meeting was to be held, Joseph Barbara, under observation. He was a detina boss of Stefano Magaddino's criminal family from Buffalo. As the participants arrived at the villa, the police controlled the car license plates and discovered their names. At this point, Croswell decided to block the access to the only road leading the villa. The police squad broke into the villa where already around 60 people had arrived, and although at that precise moment they really had nothing to fear, as they weren't actually doing anything illegal, they panicked and fled, trying to cover their tracks. The news got to the press and covered all the front pages. Tales of comical scenes were told. The impeccably dressed crime bosses, mostly in their 50s or more, certainly didn't have the agility or physique to escape from the meeting place, but they ran here and there, climbing out of windows, running around the back. Someone tried to hide in the bushes of the undergrowth. It was impossible to establish the exact number of participants, since it isn't possible to hypothesize on how many managed to escape, but a certain figure was the number of those arrested by the police the following day. That is, 58. The majority of those arrested came from New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. There were criminal leaders from Florida, Texas, California, Illinois, and Ohio. The names of the men who the police had tried for years to frame appeared on the list of those arrested. Amongst them, very important names like Trafficante, Profaci, Genovese, Magliocco, Bonanno, De Simone, Scalisi, Riela, Gambino, Magaddino, Catena, Miranda, Zito, Civello, Ida, Ormento, Coletti, and Galante. The fact that these were serious criminals can be deduced from the numbers following police reports. Let's take a look. Of the 58, 50 were found to have had prior criminal records, 35 had already been convicted, and 23 had served prison sentences. 18 had been involved in murder investigations, 15 reported for drug trafficking, 30 for gambling, and 23 for illegal use of firearms. Although for the police it had been quite a success, there had been some notable absences at the meeting amongst the American mafia bosses. There are several theories to evaluate. The criminal leaders from Chicago, Detroit, New Orleans, and San Francisco had escaped during the raid, or the police had entered the villa before they had a chance to arrive. But then again, Luciano, from his exile in Italy, was against the meeting and lobbied in those particular cities where his voice was still heard. Frank Costello didn't show up. He had explained that he was under constant surveillance after the attack. Significantly, no one showed up from New Orleans, where Costello had strong authority. Being essentially the union's treasurer, Mayor Lansky was supposed to attend, but he justified his absence with a throat problem that discouraged him from leaving the warm climates of Florida. It was Buffalo family boss Stefano Magaddino who suggested Genovese use Barbara's estate already the site of previous smaller gatherings. The meeting had been wanted and organized by Genovese, former head of Lucky Luciano's family. He had tried in every way to strengthen his position. Even more, in fact, he hoped to be elected boss of bosses in that very meeting. But the meeting never actually took place. In hindsight, it was thanks to revelations made by Lucky Luciano and one of the Jewish mafia bosses, Doc Stachter, that the police had received a tip and the meeting had been sabotaged. The Apalachin Summit began Vito Genovese's rapid decline, and his drug trafficking conviction helped destroy him completely. He went to prison in 1959 for 15 years and died there in 1969. He remained powerful enough to have a number of members of his own crime family killed, but this failed him when he attempted to have Luciano and Lansky murdered. Genovese undoubtedly realized that he had been framed, but there was nothing that could be done immediately, nor would his enemies give him any respite. Within 6 months, Genovese and some of his faithful collaborators were framed for criminal association aimed at drug trafficking. The key witness against Genovese came from a heroin dealer, Nelson Cantalopes, who strangely was known in the past to have worked for Lansky and Giancana, two major mob figures not present at the Apalachin Summit. It seemed unlikely that a character of such small criminal importance like Cantalopes was able to obtain the necessary information to incriminate Genovese. It seemed that someone had plotted to have Genovese arrested and had used federal officials in order to succeed, but the agents were too happy to have captured the boss of the Genovese family and didn't ask too many questions about how it had happened. Not long before his death, Luciano revealed what was behind Cantalopes' testimony. The pusher had been given a reward of $100,000 from Luciano, Lansky, Costello, and Gambino. During further interviews in Israel, Doc Stachter confirmed the plot and added that Mayor Lansky, out of gratitude, granted Cantalopes a pension of several $1,000s a month for the rest of his life. Cantalopes was killed in a fight in a nightclub in 1965, and it cannot be ruled out that it had been Vito Genovese's doing, his revenge for having been framed by him. The conference, although a failure for organized crime, had produced a profound effect on J. Edgar Hoover, the undisputed head of FBI. For nearly 3 decades, he had denied the existence of both the mafia and anything defined organized crime. This was a very advantageous position for Hoover. After all, it's difficult to fight what doesn't exist.